They tell you to keep your head when the woods start whispering, that the eyes you think you see are deer or reflection, that the sounds that peel the skin off quiet nights are coyotes and wind arguing through pines. They tell you that because they're comfortable telling you something that keeps their mind straight and their truck outside the yard. I can tell you right now, that's not what I heard, and that's not what I saw, and I have the scars, the smell still in my clothes, and the things locked away in evidence bags to prove it, even if nobody in a position of official authority will say it out loud. My name is Thomas Harker. I was a game warden for 12 years, served in the 4th Recon in 07, taught search and rescue courses in a place called Beckett Ridge, ran a tow company twice my size after a divorce took what it took. I'm not theatrical. I don't tell stories for credit. I tell them because someone has to. That's the voice I use when explaining the raw details at depositions, at the coffee shop where men nod and go back to their paper, when I sit by my kid's little league field and suddenly find my palms are still to the grind of a bolt-action rifle. I can measure distance in footsteps and in the way a man stops breathing when he sees the red on the snow. I learned to map sounds blindfolded, to tell a truck by its exhaust like somebody else tells you a face, to find a trail in a horse paddock by the way the mud clings. This is not gloss. This is calculus to me. Sensory arithmetic that used to work, until it didn't. The call came in the kind of late where night hasn't decided if it's all the way there yet. It was the kind of call you get and your throat tightens before you answer. A brother and I, hunting blacktail on public ground west of Blackwater Basin, a truck found abandoned with the engine warm at the pull-off. The caller sounded like a country kid who hadn't slept in 2 days. I kept my voice flat when I called dispatch, packed, slid into my old Volvo service truck, the one with the dented bumper and the faded Harker towing decal, and tore down County 9 past the feedlot, past the place where the road narrows to gravel and the map becomes a promise instead of a guarantee. Sound first. That's how it started, in that drawer of the senses that pulls itself out before your eyes have a chance to decide what's worth seeing. The moment I stepped off gravel and toward the pull-off, the whole hillside seemed to be listening. There was a low, distant noise that might have been a truck misfiring, then a deeper cadence. A wet, repetitive inhale that made the hair at the base of my neck rise. Smell after that, the second rung, ozone and something like singed hair, then metal and copper. My boots told me it was fall, a thin crust over mud, and the smell told me blood. By the time sight keyed in, there was a pickup, cab door ajar, heater still blinking amber, and 3 deep, parallel gouges through the tailgate that looked like somebody had leaned something sharpened across steel and pulled. I tell you the ladder, sound, smell, sight, touch, because I have to. In my line, the senses are ordered. Sound came first, smell second, sight third. Touch last, and when touch arrived, it was a shock because it confirmed the rest. The claw marks were through metal to the back wall of the bed. The paint was pulled like it had been skinned. There was a strip of tire torn and shredded almost opposite the gouges. Not a simple puncture or slice, but a ragged, unspooling of rubber where the tire tread had been literally sheared apart, as if someone had tried to peel the tire. Something had been in a hurry. Something had teeth, and hands big enough to take chunks from rubber, and bite impressions stamped into alloy as clean as a child's teeth into a Tootsie Pop. I collected things the way trained folks do when there's reason to think they may never get another chance. A sheriff's deputy showed up eventually. He was quiet, carrying his flashlight like a question. We bagged the bits of shredded rubber, stretched it into proper evidence bags, and marked them with CZ17 tags, sample 0039A on my slip. I lifted a piece of the tire rim and my gloved hand found an impression. Not a claw, a bite. There were crescent forms in the alloy like canine impressions, as if something had clamped and twisted. I've seen bite marks on skulls, I've seen them on plywood from stray dogs, and none matched that pattern. The mark had parallel ridges and a pressure line like a human jaw sitting where it shouldn't. Up close, the alloy showed fur embedded in the scratches, tufts of dark matted fur stuck under raised metal flakes. We bagged those too, old-school brown paper, labeled. The instinct to collect was always the first act of faith I had left. There were shell casings on the shoulder. 9mm, spent, dumped in a neat line as if someone had gone through a cylinder and then left the casings where they fell. I counted them. 7. The The deputy counted them too. They were photographed, measured for distance to the truck, and marked with small orange flags. They belonged to someone who'd been there with intent to shoot or to scare or to kill. There were drag marks in the heavy grass that led from the truck toward the timberline, a long groove gouged into the loam with tufts of hair and bits of cloth snagged in roots. It stopped abruptly deep in the forestry where the old growth swallowed the trail. The groove disappeared into a circle of bent moss, and then nothing. Nothing like a finish. That empty stopping point is a thing that has chased me since. We put the truck on the flatbed and pulled it back to the station. People in the valley talk. Eyes followed us towing. Mouths made the kind of small noises that mean they will make their own stories between themselves when no one is looking. At the station, I inventoried the evidence, wrote it down in the logbook in the neat hand of a man trying to be official. We sent the alloy wheel sample off, bite impressions first among all other things, sealed in plastic with sample ID H1127WHEEL. We documented the 3 deep parallel marks through the tailgate and took precise measurements. 14 inches long, spacing consistent with a single set of appendages, through to the frame. We photographed the shredded tire. Somewhere along the way, someone took a picture and sent it to a guy named Coley, who runs the salvage yard. Coley texted back the word, Dogman, and a laughing emoji. That would be the first time people saw the word. It would not be the last. You think I'm being dramatic? You have to. It's the only honest way to tell you why ordinary explanations break. My training, the sort that will have you find a lost child by listening to a twig pop 300 yards away, makes me methodically eliminate the usual suspects. Bears smash things. Cougars sneak quietly and like to drag prey into cover before eating. Humans vandalize with tools and leave fingerprints. Weather would not leave staggered drag marks that stop dead. A bear couldn't bite into alloy and leave crescent patterns the way we found. A cougar's jaw is not the size nor the shape to make those impressions, and the claw marks we saw on metal were not the ragged, shallow gouges a bear's claws make. They were 3 ruthless channels ripped through metal like a crowbar had been run by muscle, and then the vessel itself had been flexed. The tufts of fur were long and coarse, closer to the description of something like a wolf, except wolves don't have the forearm reach to make those parallel marks, and they do not, under any known natural circumstances, strip a tire into ribbons and bite into a wheel hub for no reason. The simple physics didn't add up. You could try to fit it into human vandalism, a man with a saw, a man with an axe. But the bite impression, the embedded hair under the alloy flakes, the pressure pattern bending the wheel lip inward, those are not human tools, they are teeth. We don't like to say that aloud. Deputies don't sign affidavits that include half-remembered words like monster. The analyst in the lab wrote inconclusive on the first run, with a professional neatness that made my throat close. They ran mitochondrial DNA on the hair sample and came back with partial sequences that matched canid at a high level, but with long mismatches, base pair insertions that the database would not reconcile. Unidentified canid-like profile, the report reads. That phrase will follow me into sleep. We described the claw marks in Report 47-2018. 3 deep parallel linear gouges, approximately 1.4 centimeters deep, through painted aluminum to the inner support and evidence of biological material. The sentence, evidence of biological material, is my own. What the lab refused to say, and what the county commission refused to put on record in the press release, was that the bite impressions in H1127WHEEL were distinct. 2 opposing crescents, with a pressure arc that suggested a jaw mass roughly the size of a large dog, but with spacing and a bite force to crack a wheel, neither easily attributable to common local fauna. They hired an external lab in Spokane. The external lab ran more tests and came back with the same result: inconclusive, insufficient homology to known reference sequences. The second report said, in its paper way, that is bureaucratic for, we don't know what bit that wheel. They closed the case in public. Officially it was suspicious but undetermined. In private, they sat around and compared notes and asked me quiet questions about how long I'd been in the ridge. I told them straight, I've seen things that don't fit, and I don't make a habit of claiming monsters when a loose dog will do. In those early hours, I did something they frown upon. I took my father's old box camera from the trunk and walk the line myself. I put my gloved hand in the drag gouge and felt the edge raked where something had come up against roots. Clean scores across moss. No hair clumps, just the back of a hand pressed into dirt with something heavy. I found a tear in a knit sleeve, a small fragment of grey wool that had been torn, not cut. It hung on a low branch. I didn't think then how personal those fragments would get. I bagged the fragment, labelled it 0042-FRAG, and slid it into evidence. I always liked having something to do with my hands. It steadied me. Word spreads in valleys like this on two engines, rumour and memory.
Folks who'd lived here longer than the highway had names for things that don't fit the shape of polite categories. I had a neighbour, Old Man Gearhart, who'd been knowledgeable in a way that made you both respect and pity him. He kept hounds and an old pickup with a name stamped on the hood. When I showed him the photos of the gouges, he leaned back and spit, and didn't laugh. "You see them in the sheep country sometimes," he said. "You see the marks. You never get back the sheep." That would be the first time I heard the word Dogman, said by a man who smelled of whiskey and diesel and had a thumb made of 100 winters of knifing. He told me of a back road along the canyon where dogs growled from the trees and where a deputy found a deer rib floating like a flag in the creek, with cuts someone swore were like a sore. I marked his words down because in these parts, old men are sometimes the ones who remember what the rest of us forget. The people who know the country know how to triangulate danger. They mark off places children are warned not to go. Gearhart showed me a place where in the 50s a trapper vanished and they found 3 parallel marks carved into the hood of a tractor. A story is a story until you get enough of them in the same place to make a map. Soon the map became my obsession. I started to notice patterns. The evidence we collected in Blackwater Basin was not unique. In 3 other files, I found mention of similar tire shreddings, of alloy bite impressions, 3 parallel gouges etched through metal, and, in one case, a bumper emblem taken from a car's front and wrapped around a low branch, like a trophy. In every instance, the authorities reached a conclusion that fit their paperwork. In none of those places did the explanation withstand the arithmetic of the evidence. The trophy emblem said something extra. Whether predator or not, this thing was collecting. It was in the stretch between method and madness where men like me get lost. My brother Eli was a wide-shouldered man who could read a light like you read a face. He called me the morning after the truck and asked if I wanted to come back out to the blind. He was supposed to be alone. He was not supposed to disappear. He never showed for dinner. I was the type to think the worst aloud. If it's a bear, call it in. He laughed at me over the phone. "It's hunting season, Tom. Come on." That laugh was the last normal sound I had from him. He was the one in the truck that night. Or so my head played the film. I kept the photo from the inside of his cab, a scrap of a baseball card stuck behind the visor, and tried to anchor the way the world worked. 2 nights after the county tow, a neighbour called in a panic. A fire. My house, which I'd left because my brother was missing, was burning. I drove like a lunatic. Sound first. A pop. A wave. Like wood turning to song in heat. Smell second. Gasoline and something else. Hair charcoal. The copper twang of burnt blood. Sight. Third. Flames licking the siding. Our truck bed still dented from the station. Touch. Last. The heat where I put my hands on the back of the Volvo. The house was not salvageable. The sheriff told me it was arson. They found a shoot of fabric, a torn fragment caught in a fence post, a piece that matched 0042-FRAG. I sat in a folding chair, my badge in my hand, and watched the embers eat the place my son calloused with his feet, and my divorce had left clean of his mother's things. They told me, "We have no evidence of foul play beyond the fire accelerant." They said, "No motive and no suspects." That night, I slept in the back of the Volvo, and the smell of burned wool followed me like a second shadow. When a person you know disappears, your brain divides into a before and an after. The before has its own rules, the way he loved coffee, bitter and long, the way he cleaned his rifle in the evenings. The after is contoured entirely by absence. The sheriff's office moved through their steps, file reports,
post missing pictures, check last known coordinates. I had skin in the game. I had the leash of protocol and the chain of grief, and the habits of a man who'd been taught to trace evidence back to a source. My training allowed me to assemble a plan that would not exist in a manual. We needed bait, and we needed witnesses. We needed a way to make whatever it was show itself again, or at least to mark it in the wood in a way that made a jury glance twice. The first confrontation was accidental. We were checking a trail when the underbrush parted, and I heard it. The sound rung with that same inhale I'd heard by the truck. The sound, then smell, then sight, then touch. My ladder. And I could tell exactly where my fingers should go before I went into action. The butt of the shotgun I had slung across my shoulder, the zip of the shell into the chamber, the pressure of the stock against my shoulder blade. Out of the trees stepped a hulking silhouette, upright for a moment like a man, but with the shoulders of some animal that had learned shoulders could be a kind of theft. The light hit its face, and I saw canine and human stitched together. Long muzzle, set of lips that pulled back on teeth that were wrong, too big, too widely spaced. It smelled faintly of iron and wet earth. There was a sound that was not a bark, not a growl. It was a low, internal mechanical rumble like something with lungs and a throttle. Gunfire followed. We shot. I don't pretend we were the first to do that. We blew flares into the night. The creature yelped and took 2 shots that looked like they should have downed any large carnivore. That was the plan. The bullets thudded into meat and missed the bones. It flinched, staggered, and then charged. It had an awareness of vehicles. It dove at the hood of our truck and thudded against the steel and left 3 parallel gouges through the fender, right where the bumper meets the frame. We sat, frozen, breathless, with hands shaking and shots ringing. One of the men drove the truck forward and rammed the creature, aluminum and steel crunching, the horn a stunned animal cry. The truck's grille took a beating and came back with a missing emblem. The emblem, when we later found it, had a smear of coarse fur and a nick that matched teeth. Someone, perhaps in adrenaline or reverence, took the emblem and hung it, later, like a trophy from a low branch at the edge of the camp. The creature bled but did not surrender. It limped out of the clearing and into the trees. It left a track pattern that was too narrow for a bear and too wide for a man, 2 toes ahead, 2 behind, as if its weight had been redistributed to adapt. We tried to burn it. We left a trail of fuel and flares, set them, and watched with a kind of feverish hope. Fire will take anything or prove nothing. We thought the flames would force something out of what hid. The flames licked, and a shape ran through the outer edges, smoke curling around its pelt, and, when it paused on a small rise, the flare caught its profile and filled my head with the smell of burned hair. Ammunition had little lasting effect. We found torn bullets and buckshot slug clusters embedded in a nearby stump. But the creature's hair clung to the trees like a wreath, and the tracks led onward, unafraid of the scorched earth. Our rifles only made it mad. My brother called me from the line that night. He said, voice thin, "It knows we're looking." That was the last time. Institutional pushback came in the usual forms. Skeptical county commissioners, a coroner's report that spoke politely of non-conclusive trauma and advanced decomposition in an unidentifiable pattern. The personnel at the state lab sat me down and gave me the words you give men to make them feel like their belief is a psychiatric problem. "We can't ascribe biological taxonomy without a consistent DNA match," the lead technologist said, adjusting her glasses. They told me we were likely dealing with either human predation, exotic canine, or misinterpreted evidence. They offered a press statement that blamed vandalism and misadventure. Radio hosts called in the morning and either laughed or spoke to me like a man on the edge, which I suppose I was. Friends advised me to let it go and move on for your son's sake. I moved on, but my legs remembered every footprint. The neighborhood, though, keeps its own ledger. People who lived longer in the hills, hunters who learned to read wrong tracks, and old women who knit in the evenings and listened to the creak of their porches, corroborated. A woman named Maris down on Old Greer Road told a story of her husband's truck returning with the hood chewed and emblem missing. They found the emblem later nailed to a cedar, and the man refused to go back to the fields. An ex-logger told me of seeing a thing on a summer dusk that walked on 2 legs like a person, and killed a sow in the pen and then left its belly open as if to show you a lesson. Even the kids shared texts of grainy video. The internet makes ghosts into memes.
The local paper ran an op-ed that blamed folklore for bad decisions. The national outlets came through with expert analysis about misidentified wolves in rut. It was convenient for the people whose job it was to remain official. The keeper came to me in winter, when cold makes us simpler and braver. He had hands like cupped stone and called himself Jeb Hawkins. He lived beyond the last mail drop in a shack that smelled like guano and peppermint oil. He had a face like an old map, and the kind of long, slow mouth you get from always saving your words for the worst things. He knew what the lab couldn't say. They're changing, he said. Not what they tell you. Evolving's not just for bacteria. You seen how the claw marks are sometimes on steel, sometimes on wood? They learn to use what's around. They take parts now. Prey is not just food. He pulled from a drawer a small B-52 cigar tin that had, in it, a bumper badge wrapped in a piece of leather. "Trophy," he said. "Keeps the head clear for the king." He told me the old stories of men who vanished, of traps found set empty, of deer skeletons artful as sculptures and deliberately arranged, not for feeding, but for something like message-making. The escalation to direct confrontation is a line with blood on both sides. We pursued it. I had a convoy, men who owed me favors, a scrappy crew with a few aimable riddles and a crossbow in the back. We set a pick, baited a clearing with an old cow carcass we found at a farm out by the creek, and waited. Sound, then smell, then sight. The ladder. And the sound that night was an almost laugh, high and cracking, like somebody trying to imitate a radio with a throat that was not made to speak words the way we used them. Smell rolled across the clearing. Damp fur, musk, and an undercurrent of something metallic that tasted like pennies. We saw movement. The creature came across the open with an almost casual gait, head down. The men shot. We burned. Bullets peppered it. A slug took its flank and left a bruise the size of a saucer. It bit back into a stump and then pushed high into the trees. We tethered a line, and someone threw a Molotov, and the flames rose and the creature rolled and staggered and then retreated into the wood, leaving tufts of matted fur in the underbrush and huge drag marks across the sod. We tracked, and the tracks led to a low ridge and stopped. As always, they stopped like somebody hit the eject button. By then, the talk in the town had turned to what our actions might provoke. The sheriff warned me to back off. "You're interfering with an investigation," he said, his tone that bureaucratic edge that felt colder than winter. The local news called me a vigilante. I had to present probable cause to continue. The men who'd been with me, the county boys and the hounds, were shaken in a way that made them angry instead of fearful. Anger is a poor replacement for grief. There was a night, mid-October, when the creature came close enough to touch me. I woke to the sound of glass. My pickup's window was smeared with a smear of copper and hair. A cut in the glass, a shallow cuneate mark like a palm had been dragged across it, and a smear of blood across the outside. The smell hit me as soon as I opened the door. Iron and hot fur. The car alarm droned and the creature backed away, leaving its signature. A torn piece of shirt fabric with a button still attached, tucked under a windshield wiper. It was an attempt at communication. It knew I'd be looking. I kept the button. The sheriff told me to go home and rest. I did not rest. I sat on the porch and listened and thought of my brother's laugh. Eli was not found for weeks. When they did find him, it was in a place that made you lose the ability to count. His hat was caught on the stub of a branch 3 feet up, his pack empty. A pattern of small gouges around him as if the creature had run its finger along his ribs and then stepped back. He had claw marks on his jacket, a triangle of 3 deep parallel cuts on the inside of his thigh that mirrored the marks on the truck's tailgate. His face was untouched, as if the thing had wanted to take some pieces and leave the rest as sign. The coroner's report was careful and clinical. They wrote down trauma consistent with animal interaction and no evidence of suspect human involvement. They listed the time of death as undetermined within a 24-hour range. They wrote that the cause of death could not be conclusively ascribed. Those words are neat and dry, and they leave a man in front of them with only rubble in his hands. I tried to burn the body.
irrational and practical both, an attempt to erase the part of him that the creature might have touched, as if burning could anchor memory in a different way. I'm ashamed I did that. The thing I feared most was that they would find his bones arranged like a warning, and I couldn't let that be what defined him for other people's curiosity. The fire the county doc set to those remains was both a blessing and a sin. I remember the smell, hair and bone and something metallic, the ladder again, sound, smell, sight, touch. The heat stung my face like a slap. The deputy who was there said nothing, as if silence could make peace. The evidence bags filled with ash and labelled H34ASHE. The results from the lab said fragmentary DNA consistent with human, maternal and paternal haplogroups, but with contaminants consistent with multiple unclassified canid sequences. It read like a conversation someone else had written in, as if halfway through they decided the handwriting was theirs and the pen had slipped. The loss of Eli rewired me. I left my job. The county made me an object lesson at a meeting. Procedures are in place. Do not take matters into your hands. And I became a man with a different calendar. My kid saw none of the rituals men use for grief, because we were living out an unofficial war. I sold the tow truck and bought a four-wheel drive with a cage in the rear and an aftermarket winch. I filled the truck with gear, thermal scopes, suppressed rifles, spike strips, a surplus of ammunition, steel snares designed to trap a moose. I read books on wolf packs and on introduced canids and on Jeb's missives about certain rituals. I learned primal things like how to make scent lures, how to read the angle of a drag, and how to set a trip line that felt more like an insult than a trap. My sleep was tactical. I had a chart on the wall with hand-drawn notes, tracks, dates, wind patterns, and the tiered senses. I let the obsession carve me into a man who could not be surprised by blood, because I had become a person who catalogued it. The big attempt, the one I thought would end it, was in spring. We baited a valley where 3 prior incidents clustered like bones under the brush. We set remote cameras, triangulated watches, and had men posted to intercept. I built a rig on an old International 4700 with a steel bed, a heavy winch, and spikes that could drop from the undercarriage like a bear trap. I thought bringing machine to beast would confuse the ledger of instinct. We had someone to film, someone to radio, someone to keep watch with night vision. We had more men than sense. We had a hunch and a plan. It happened exactly like the movies. Say it won't. Sound first, like a clack of branches being combed. Smell, ozone and the wet iron of fresh blood. Sight, a hulking outline in the fog, lit by the floodlights we set, monstrous in the glow. Touch, the air itself went cold against my skin, and the hair on my forearms prickled. We fired. Guns barked and flares bloomed, and a vehicle rammed into the silhouette. The metal shrieked, and the thing bounced off the grille and dug long, deep, parallel marks through the front where the bumper had been. It screamed, not human, not like any animal I'd catalogued, and then it stood on 2 back legs and beat the hood with a fist-like forepaw like a man striking a drum. We shot high and low. My rifle bucked in my shoulder, and a slug clipped its shoulder, slowing it for a heartbeat. The muzzle flashes lit fur short and long, and somehow, amidst the tenor of chaos, I saw a flash of something like intelligence. We tried fire again. Someone poured fuel, and I tossed a blazing torch. It set hair alight and the creature rolled, but the heat only seemed to make it angrier. We thought heat would be the one equalizer. I was wrong. When a man has only one gear left, he pushes it until everything breaks. We mounted the winch and took a last, terrible decision. To attempt to drag it into the open and secure it. The hook found a shoulder, wound the winch, and the thing howled. For a grotesque beat, I thought we had trapped it. It pulled away like a live thing connected to a pit of iron. The cable snapped with an elongated shriek like a piano string. One of the men was thrown clear, and his hand hit his own face. The bone around his eyes was a pattern of fractures we all see in movies and think they've invented. The creature, perhaps wounded, perhaps enraged, retreated, leaving behind tufts of matted dark fur and a single, glinting tooth embedded in the bumper. The tooth, my God, later proved to be chemical composite and bone, with a density that did not quite match any measured canine sample, at least according to the lab notes I retained. Small arms had limited effect.
They brought bullets that poured out into the night and left me with a stack of casings and a hollow where the thing had been. Personal loss was measured in the things that followed. The bastard town council closed hunting seasons for a week and then opened them again for commerce. Insurance adjusted policies to avoid major claims, and my son's mother signed papers that put him further away because she thought the danger would make him less safe in my care. The institutional limb recoiled. The sheriff pretended procedure. The state lab offered polite, we can't attribute letters, and the press wrote columns about hunters playing at predators and urban legends in rural areas. My grievance filed, but did not change anything. The blood in my hands did not matter to the ledger of the world. After that night, I stopped reaching for the phone. I started writing letters and burning them in a little ritual. I'd slide the paper into the flame and watch ink curl away. I kept objects, a bumper emblem wrapped in leather, a tuft of fur in a sealed jar, the alloy fragment with bite impressions labelled and double-bagged. They were all items of evidence and of faith in a way. Experts would tell me that emotional attachment to evidence is a procedural anomaly. I know what I have, and what they call anomalies in the lab are the stubborn facts of my life. I went to the keeper again. Jeb fed me whiskey and a sandwich that tasted of old fat and told me to watch for patterns. They like low ground in the half-light, he said, and they like things that mean people are around. But they don't always mean to kill. Sometimes it's communication, sometimes it's study. You leave a thing alone and it learns how you live. He told me about a man who'd tried to domesticate one in '72 and woke up with his barn bare and his horse teeth scattered like coins. The man had moved. He wouldn't speak for our paper. You don't get to keep these things, Jeb said, tapping the side of his nose. Not with a badge, not with a rifle. I prepared like a man building a church. My truck held a kit: rope, kerosene, spare plates of steel, a spare wheel with the old bite impressions mounted on a fat axle, a small list of calibers, and where we'd place them, a handwritten glance toward the places that had the three-lined marks. I cooked up an ammunition strategy: slugs for stopping power, hollow points where the meat should be, buckshot for area. I thought making a plan would give me back a sense of numeracy. I fitted a camera to the hood. I slept inside a sleeping bag in a lean-to for weeks. I hung the bumper badge on a post and slept with my rifle at my side, like a thing guarding my elbow. Obsession became ritual. I started leaving notes for myself. If they take a tire, check the rim. If you find 2 crescent bites, you mark them H128. I had files within files, each a small map of rage and order. I painted on the inside of the truck a line where I measured weeks in hash marks, and next to them an entry: Eli, gone. I tried to keep the human part of me alive, for the small man who needed his son at school plays. But the obsession bled into everything. My son had to have a birthday in a park, and I showed up with a thermos of black coffee and a smile that was too brief. The rest of me sat in the vehicle with the wheel, with the bite impression balanced on the dash like a holy relic. When he was 5, my son asked me if the thing had teeth like his father. I told him the truth like a goad. Bigger. Not like us. He asked then what the thing wanted. I told him I didn't know. He asked if we'd ever stop it. I had no proxy prayer. There was a night where the edge of what I would allow myself to do with a loaded gun came close to snapping. I tried a trap set with a confluence of scent lures and a pig carcass that I set under a camera with a meat cage. The meat cage was reinforced with rebar and had a spring mechanism I jury-rigged. The bait was fresh. We waited. It came in the pre-dawn, silent as breath on glass, and we triggered the cage. The cage closed. We thought we had it. The thing had ripped and gutted the pig while the cage sat half-closed, and then smashed the bars off the reinforced cage like they were paper. The spring sheared. The camera jammed. I held the broken rebar in my hand and thought, we nearly had it. We nearly had it. We nearly had it. Those were the words I used like prayer, though they were only the equivalent of a knife scraping on a plate. The one thing that will not read well in any of the official papers is that in the end what we captured never fully made sense. The bite impressions in alloy are one of the clearest physical pieces of stubborn truth. The lab did everything they could hide behind: tests, repetitions, outside contractors, and wrote inconclusive. They could not validate the DNA. I think often that the sample was contaminated or the pattern so altered by age and the animal's diet that nothing in the database fit.
But the bite ring exists. The tire ripped to ribbons exists. The tufts of dark matted fur exist. The 3 parallel lines across steel exist.
The drag marks stop abruptly at the same place human narratives stop, at the circumference of our ability to translate. They are stubborn facts, just as stubborn as the misshapen tooth we recovered from a bumper, and as stubborn as the single emblem that someone nailed to a cedar limb. Evidence progression in my head runs like this. Immediate scene clues we photograph and bag. Collected physical traces we send to labs. Lab attempts reach an inconclusive. Local corroboration arrives like a chorus, and then, finally, an old keeper winds up in your kitchen, telling you something important you might not want to hear. I tried to sell the story one afternoon to a magazine that buys strange things. The editor was young and skeptical and good at typing. He wanted horror and he wanted neatness. He asked me about motives. He asked if I wanted to keep this as an open file series that would drive clicks. He wanted to fit my brother's death into a narrative that people could hold at a cocktail party as anecdote. I told him I had no motive to sell grief for a weekend's worth of ad revenue. He published a small story that framed me as a man driven to extremes. That is how the world digests monsters, as personality columns, as a kind of confession you can read over coffee. The aftertaste is obsession. The aftermath is home burned and replaced with metal and glass, and a box of things that may mean something. I have, in the back of a locked storage unit, a board with bullet impacts mapped on it, labelled by date and caliber. I have a glass jar full of tufts of fur with a paper strip reading H17FUR, and a small corner of someone's jacket with a button. The local paper files have my name under letters that read Amateur Investigator. The county took down my credentials because I violated policy. I do not sleep well. My boy sees me occasionally and returns home with a mama's cautious eyes. The living part of me that remains wants to warn you. If you go into a place where the trees hold your name like a rumor, be careful about laughing at the sound when it is only a breath. The dark has its own grammar. Sound, arrow, smell, arrow, sight, arrow, touch. Learn it. The creature would choose the edges where human law thins and ancient things have long memories. If you find 3 parallel gouges through your truck, do not assume it was a man with a crowbar. If you find bite impressions in an alloy wheel, call someone you trust and seal the evidence. If they tell you it's nothing, trust them. And then listen to the old men who have mismatched eyes and hands like maps. The difference between a shrug and a prepared response is sometimes the difference between life and a story. I lay my confession out in the way a man who has kept doing the arithmetic of survival does. I am not a flashy hero. I was a warden. I was a brother with a badge. I became a man who rans hoods and burns forests for the things he still can't name. I have confronted the thing. Gunfire, vehicle ramming, attempted burning. Got some wounds, lost a house, lost a brother. Got doctrine replaced with denial. The institutions will often tell you it was weather, or a human prank, or a pack of wild dogs. They will do that because papers and budgets and elections make siege engines of reason. People will prefer the neat box of vandalism over the messy puzzle of unidentified predator. I tell you this so you understand the stakes when the word inconclusive sits on a lab sheet. Inconclusive is not a sigh of relief. It is a crescent of not knowing that circles your throat. There are small things I have kept to remind myself of who I was. A chipped tooth that came from a bumper, the emblem nailed to wood, a smear of blood on the side window that the smear analysis returned as human blood mixture and unknown canid. There are the shell casings the deputy found, lined on the shoulder, 7. They tell you a story. That story is of people who tried and failed. The drag marks that stop abruptly in the tree line are a question. The tufts of dark matted fur are an answer that doesn't fit our taxonomy. The torn clothing fragment with a button is a proof that they touch and take and leave. The keeper tells you the law, the labs tell you the science, and both are necessary in different rooms. My son asks me sometimes why I cannot let it go. I tell him plainly, because some boundaries are not purely about property, and when a thing has taken your blood and called it modification, you do not get to let it go the way you put down a book.
You turn pages. There is no last page yet. I taught him how to walk without breaking twigs. I taught him how to watch silently. He still loves dinosaurs and tells me about their teeth. We share a small laugh, and then I watch him fold in on himself when a truck drives by with a torn bumper. Perhaps I am selfish. Perhaps I am haunted. Perhaps both.
The end, if an end could even be offered, would be a neat paragraph where the creature is boxed and explained, and the lab verifies every scrap, and everyone gets their money back, and the men who lost something recover. That is not how life works. In my notebooks, the last entries are practical and petty and ritualistic. Replace the cable of the winch, check the teeth on the spare rim, rotate the bait, patch the bullet holes with epoxy to keep the rabbits from nesting. I prepare for every contingency because preparation is the small god I can offer at the altar of only one day at a time. I keep the bumper badge hidden under an old shirt in a box. It sits there like a promise. I keep a small vial of fur, and occasionally I open the jar like a man who drinks to remember. I still go to the places where the three-lined marks ring like stars on old cars, and I look for the drag marks and the circles where the trail stops. I talk to Jeb sometimes, and he tells me the old songs, how once, long ago, men traded with them, and the line blurred between beast and contract. He warns me that they are adapting, and that things that adapt are dangerous because they create new habits that make the old rules obsolete. If you are reading this and you feel the urge to laugh and say, it's just a story, remember that there are pieces left in labs labeled inconclusive, and truth grows like weeds in the cracks of pavement whether we sweep them or not. There is a tooth in a box, and a bumper emblem nailed to a cedar that does not belong to any man who wants the world in tidy boxes. There are 3 parallel marks through a tailgate that a jury could not explain. There are shell casings counted on the shoulder. There is the smell of singed hair that will not be scrubbed out. There is an emblem that hangs like a flag. There was my brother. And there is the sound, always the sound, that starts everything. I am still here. I still listen when the woods speak. I still measure the world in the ladder of senses. I still sleep with the rifle under a child's blanket in case the thing comes again. I still wake sometimes, heart thudding. I still think I can stop it if I am clever enough, methodical enough, cruel enough. The rational part of me knows better. Obsession is not the same as solution. The heart that loved a man in a body that laughed about coffee remembers all the small, precise things. The thing that hunts is changing. The labs will tell you, inconclusive. The county will tell you, closed. The keeper will tell you, not ended. My son will ask where his uncle is, and I will not answer with anything that he could hold to make himself safe. If you go into the wild where the trees are old and the road is a thread, and you hear something inhale like a person who has stolen a throat, remember this ladder. Sound, then smell, then sight, then touch. Mark the things that are out of place. 3 parallel gouges through metal, bite impressions stamped into alloy, shredded tire like unspooled rope, tufts of dark matted fur, blood smears on glass, a torn fragment of clothing, a bumper emblem as trophy, shell casings counted on the shoulder, drag marks into the tree line that stop like somebody closing the book. Collect. Photograph. Bag. Do not let the labs be the only memory. Tell your neighbor. Listen to the old men. Keep your child inside if the nights are thin. I have no resolution. Nobody that I trust has found one. The institutional voices will tell you to keep calm. The old man at the end of the road will tell you to keep a light burning and to not leave jars of things near the door. I will tell you this. There is something that walks low in the places we thought were ours. It can break metal. It can chew alloy. It can take a bumper and turn it into a symbol. It can stop at the edge of its trail and leave you with the understanding that some things are not comprehensible to a ledger. So I keep my lists. I check my traps. I reload my rifles. I teach my son to measure the night. I wait. I do not know how to close this. The official reports read undetermined, and the lab has boxed the word inconclusive and placed it on a shelf for them to forget. I keep the evidence in my own private alphabet. I keep the files. I keep the smell. If any good will come of me, perhaps it will be in the form of a warning, or a map, or a needle stuck into some man's lapel to prick him awake. They taught us to count when we were kids. Count the signs. Do not be the man who laughs at the 3 parallel gouges and later finds one on his child's treehouse.
I've tried to see the thing and fail. I've tried to contain it and failed. I've tried to say small prayers and burn ashes and watch for patterns. All I can tell you is this. You pay attention, it learns. You act, it adapts. If we do not learn faster than it adapts, we will only be left with more inconclusives and more things nailed to trees. I remain at the edge, a man with a box of improbable things and a map of the nights. I remain because I have to. I remain because a brother's laugh still echoes in my skull.
I remain because I taught a boy to look up into the branches for what might be watching. I remain with a final, necessary warning. Do not assume the world is smaller than your fear. It is larger and older and changing. And sometimes what changes is not a thing you can reason away. The last thing I will say is not comfort. It is a direction. Stay ready. Keep your records. Trust your ladder of senses. And above all, remember that the night is patient. It does not forget. It only waits for the right pattern to begin again.